question that I tend to get pretty often from people is regarding the decision to either stay with long-term rentals or switch to short-term rentals. Sometimes it's that they already have a property that they want to, know if they should pivot, or they're brand new and they're trying to decide, should I do long-term rentals or should I do short-term rentals? Okay. Now, if you're new here, I'm Chia Gazi Fawale. I am a pediatric anesthesiologist. I love to chat about real estate. We have now done both long-term rentals, short-term rentals, and even some mid-term rentals in between. And I love to have these conversations with people because, hey, people are building wealth. It's great to have those conversations. And if I can help you in your journey, I would have done my job. Now, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my background, my investing background, so that you understand the mindset and the framework that leads to the different things that I'll be telling you shortly, okay? We are based in the Syracuse, New York area, where, the laws are heavily in favor of tenants. No shade to that, okay? But during the pandemic, most of our properties did fine, but we had a couple of properties where we had some tenants. We had at least one tenant, for example, who stayed for like 2 years without paying a dime from his pocket. Yes, we got money from the government, but you know what happens when you have a tenant that's not paying anything from his pocket? You're like, I don't know how much longer I want to do this, just like house people, just like that. I don't know, right? So we made a pretty hard pivot to short-term rentals for the simple idea that I didn't have to deal with that. Okay, so we still have our long-term rentals. We haven't sold all of them yet, but if you want to buy them, hey, reach out. Okay. Okay, so I love my short-term rentals. People pay me before they come. I have codes that I send to my guests, and when their stay is done, the codes expire, and so we move on from that. However, I do know that there are certain situations where long-term rentals are still a very viable option. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise, but you need to know if that is you and if it is a better situation or a better option for you than it is to actually pivot to short-term rentals. I'm very heavily biased towards short-term rentals for a reason that I will show you in a moment, but I like to kind of paint the picture clearly so that you can make your decision. I'm not your financial advisor. I don't pretend to be one. I'm just sharing with you, thoughts, ideas, and things that have worked for me and my clients in different settings. Okay, so let's just say, for example, you have a property. Let's say you're moving out of town, okay? You just finished your residency or you just finished your job, just finished some kind of training, and you happen to have a house and you're trying to decide, should I just rent it out as a long-term rental or should I rent it out or should I put it on the short-term rental market? There are a couple of factors that you want to consider when you are making this decision. Number one, and I probably think is the most important, is what are the prevailing rules and regulations? And this comes in two shades and forms. Number one, are the tenant laws, are the landlord-tenant laws more favorable for landlords or for tenants? Okay. Generally speaking, again, this is just information, no shade. I'm neither Republican nor Democrat, okay? But Republican states tend to favor landlords more, and Democrat states like New York, okay, and I will almost dare say California, right, tend to favor tenants more, for what it's worth. Neither here nor there, okay? It's just what it is. You want to know, if your tenant doesn't pay, how long does it take you to actually be able to get them out of the property? You need to know that. In some places, again, upstate New York again, you could be there for at least 90 days before you can even do anything to get them out, okay? So that's number one, tenant laws. The second thing on the short-term rental side is, are short-term rentals even allowed in the area? Because if you can navigate these first two questions, your answer may already be in front of you that, you know what, short-term rentals aren't even allowed, so that's already off the table. Let's even just start the conversation. It's a long-term rental or you sell it, okay? Number two is, where is the property located? Okay. Now this is probably, this really should be number one. But because I know how much the tenant laws can impact your decision, I make that number one instead. So number two is, where is the property located? Because if you have what I call a class B, if you're in a class B, class C type neighborhood, and what do I mean by that? There's like this scale in real estate where people grade neighborhoods and things from like A to D, A being like cream of the crop, best properties, desirable location, nicely manicured lawns, etc. Places where we will all love to live in if we could afford it, right? if you were in a Class A neighborhood, that could mean one thing versus D type neighborhoods tend to be places where, you know, you lock your car and you turn around and make sure that there's no gun to your back type of thing. And then classes B and C tend to fall somewhere in between. Nice, simple working class neighborhoods. B's tend to be, you know, safer and, you know, better looking houses than C, for example. Okay. Now, when it comes to cash flow, people say that Class B and C neighborhoods tend to cash flow more because the properties are cheaper, but the rents aren't as cheap. So you generally get more cash flow from those type neighborhoods. However, when it comes to setting up a short-term rental, you generally want to be closer to A than even B or C. You definitely do not want C, at least in my opinion. We had a property once that we did a rental arbitrage on, and we made it look really nice on the inside. And very often we'll have guests come in and they will say, oh my gosh, the pictures were so great, but the neighborhood is sketchy. So if your property, you got to be very honest with yourself and say, can someone who comes to this property think in their head, this neighborhood is sketchy? If the answer is yes, not a short-term rental, not at all. Okay, because the last thing you want as a short-term rental is for somebody to put in the review, amazing property on the inside, but the neighborhood was sketchy. That will cancel out, like that's just like, you know what, obituary to your short-term rental listing, forget it. Okay, so if your property is in a location that anybody could describe as it's a little sketchy, no, I wouldn't do it. Make it a long-term rental, okay, or something that people can actually come and visit before they commit. Because if it's a short-term rental and they leave that on the reviews, no, just don't do it, okay? Number 3 will be, how does it cash flow as either a long-term rental or a short-term rental? Now, the reason why you have a lot of people pivot into short-term rentals is because short-term rentals generally make more money than long-term rentals. And in this market in particular, where home prices have gone up significantly, interest rates have gone up significantly, it is generally a little harder to find properties that still cash flow as long-term rentals. Now, there are ways to get creative about your property, maybe rent out by the room or rent it out, you know, furnished or something. However, generally speaking, you want to be able to calculate and say, okay, will it cash flow as a long-term rental versus as a short-term rental? And when you calculate that cash flow number, which I'll show you in a second how to do, you can then determine, is the cash flow enough for me to be worth my while, right? I know I'm getting the mortgage paid down, but is that extra enough of a cushion for me for it to be worth all the work that I'm going to be doing, operating it as a long-term or a short-term rental? Now, we have a nifty calculator down below that you can get in the link that will be left below this, but I generally want to just show you kind of what to keep in mind when you're calculating for cash flow for a short-term rental or a long-term rental, and you can determine which one will work for your property. Okay, so let's just hop over to the calculator here, and if you're listening to the podcast here, you could probably hop over to the YouTube video if you want to see this analysis. Okay, because it may be easier that way, but I'm going to just basically talk out loud as you listen so that you have at least a mental picture. Okay, so when it comes to long-term rentals, we'll start with long-term rentals. The first thing on your profit calculator will be, well, of course, the math is income minus expenses, okay? So even if it's going to be a long-term rental, you want to ask yourself, okay, so what are the possible sources of income that this property has? Number 1 will be your regular rents. How do you identify the rents? How much money can a property make? There's a website called rentometer.com, and that is RENTOMETER, rentometer.com. You can plug in an address and then it'll give you kind of, you know, low to high to median rents for the area for the bedroom count that you specify. So you go on there, you determine how much money your property can make. And so let's say if it's a single family home, then you basically plug it into the calculator like we have here. That this single family home, for example, will be making $2,400 a month. Okay, let's say it's a nice, good size single family home in a good neighborhood, right? $2,400 a month, for example. Now, on the calculator, we have both a monthly and an annual column, and you can now see kind of how much you make total if you rented it $2,400 a month. Now, with long-term rentals, we also factor in a vacancy number. I like to use 10% to be conservative. I basically assuming that if a tenant leaves, let's say at the end of their stay, it may take me a couple of days or weeks to turn the place over. So I normally put in a 10% vacancy. Now, when you are buying a property from people, they will normally tell you, oh, it's never vacant. You always factor in a vacancy number when estimating your returns on a long-term rental, because even if it's not an actual vacancy, it can be a functional vacancy. Your taxes, you get to look up on the county and or city website. Insurance, you call an insurance broker. If it's a single family home, let's say this insurance is, let's just say $1,400. And then something for maintenance. So if it's a single family home and the tenant can take care of their own maintenance, they can handle like the lawn, they can handle their own snow clearing or whatever, snow removal, you can make that zero. You may want to have a property manager on board, in which case they may take, like a 10%, depending on where you are. You want to interview a number of property managers. Your utilities, if it's a single family home, your tenant will probably take care of that. Now, if it's a multi-family home where you have multiple people, then you can see that you can plug in those numbers here, and you can factor in those things that the tenant will not be taking care of. Your repairs, any professional fees for your accountant, any kind of legal expenses that you may incur annually. So you can see here that, let's say, you've done your income, you've put in your expenses. If your income is $28,000 a year, your expenses are your net operating income, for example, here, based on the math that we've just done here, if your income is $28,000 a year, your expenses are about $11,000 a year, your net operating income is about $17,000. Let's just say you bought the property for $350,000. Okay. So you can see that based on the math that we currently have here, hold on, so for a long-term rental, you also have a 20%, 25% down payment. Okay, so based on this math, by the time you factor in your mortgage payments at the end of the day, you're actually in the red, okay? You will need a higher rent to be able to command a better rent. So now let's just say that you're actually pretty savvy, and somehow your monthly income is actually $3,500 with this property. Now your cash on cash return is 8.13%, okay? But you can basically just like plug numbers in here, calculate, and now kind of see what it'll take for your property to cash flow. Remember though, that this rent is not something that you just change at whim, okay? You have to actually, get the place rented, you need to be within what the market can actually carry. So even if you need $3,500 to be able to break, to have any cash flow, you can't just change the number to $3,500. You actually have to check your rentometer or check Zillow and see what rents your property can support. Okay, so in this case, let's just say this property would not work as a long-term rental. Okay, so then you go over to the short-term rental profit calculator and then plug in the address into, AirDNA and see how much money the property can make. So let's just keep it that the property price is $350,000. You put in your 10% down payment. That is your monthly payment on a regular basis. Let's say you put it on AirDNA and these are the numbers that it gave you. So your income, $94,000. Heck, that is higher than $28,000 in case you didn't notice, okay? $94,000. Your taxes are gonna be the same, even if it's a short or a long-term rental. Your insurance is gonna be higher because it is a short-term rental. You will now have cleaning fees. So let's just say that that's your cleaning fee, because it doesn't matter, how much you bought the property, cleaning fee is a cleaning fee. Supplies, utilities, you're gonna pay those because you're not tenants, right? Internet, subscriptions, other maintenance. I always factor in the management expense just for future, underwriting purposes, right? And then repairs, and then if there are any HOA or condo fees, I put those in as well. As you can see, with this higher income, let me drop this number a little bit just to make it a little more sort of realistic. Okay, so with that drop, let's see. So this meets the 5X rule that I normally talk about. Okay, so here you can see that while it was 94, it was flush in cash flow. We were $21,000 cash on cash return, 32%. When I dropped the number here a little bit and I said, let's try 70,000, look at that. That just went into the red. Okay, so how do I make this realistic to you? You have to take your address, plug it into AirDNA, and put it here and basically get what that number is. So a sweet spot here, just for my example purposes, could probably be like, let's say 85,000. So if the property can make $85,000, then we're golden. Okay, then we're golden. Now I do actually have a property here that's we bought for like 350, and that property I'm projecting will probably make $80,000. So let's see what this would do. All right, so this is actually pretty realistic here. That's probably about the taxes that we pay. Yeah, about that. Yep. So 13% cash on cash return. Is this like bouncing off the walls? 13%, I'll still take a 13% over a negative cash flow. But if I were buying, if I were like going into this from scratch, I'll prefer something in the 20% and higher, even at today's interest rates. I needed to at least pencil and paper even before I get into it. So this, if I had a property like this with this profile, that would need to be something else that will make me actually want this. For example, this property is like 10 minutes from the one that we already had. I'm like, okay, ease of management, just to kind of like add to something that I have in that area, I may consider this, knowing that I then have to get my $80,000, because even just a $10,000 drop and we're in the red, okay? But basically, this is just, an example of how I would evaluate a property to determine if it's one that I will keep as a long-term rental or as a short-term rental. This is just to kind of show you how the math differs for long-term rentals versus short-term rentals. Now, a few things to point out. With the short-term rental analysis, the difference is that you have cleaning fees to account for. You have to account for your utilities and internet. You have to account for all these other maintenance and management expenses that you were able to make zeros when it came to the long-term rental analysis. So on the long-term rental sheet, because of a single-family home, you were able to pass on the expense to the tenant. If you did it as a short-term rental, you have to factor those in. So let's kind of summarize for a second of what we've talked about. Number one, we've said in deciding on whether or not you want to keep a property as a long-term rental or a short-term rental, go back to the basics. What's the overall big picture goal? Where do we want to see this going? Why are we doing this in the first place? Okay. And then we go into number one, tenant laws. Okay, are they favorable for landlords or for tenants? Number two, short-term rental regulations. Can you even do short-term rentals in the area? Number three, where is the property located? Okay, are we in an A, B, C, or D type neighborhood? Are there attractions nearby that people actually want to come for? Okay, and then we said, will it cash flow as a long-term rental or as a short-term rental? Generally speaking, short-term rentals tend to cash flow more. However, if you look on the different platforms, so I said Rentometer for long-term rentals, and then AirDNA for short-term rentals, basically plug in the address and see how much you can make, put it into our free calculator and see where you end up. And if it cash flows one way or better the other, now you ask yourself, will it be worth my while, right? Knowing that short-term rentals generally demand a little more in terms of management. And now I'm making a video on how to run a short-term rental without it taking over your life. Okay, so it doesn't have to take over your life. Okay, I've got a full-time job. I've got 3 kids. We're not, and I'm making this video. Okay. Okay, so short-term rentals don't have to take over your life, but you need to know that they are a little more involving in terms of the management. Okay, particularly if you want to if you want to take advantage of the tax advantages. Okay, so just factor in all of that. And then let me know, did you choose to go long-term rental or short-term rental? All right, if you've gotten any value from this, I hope you take a moment to like, subscribe, share it with a friend, post it on social media, let them know that they can make these decisions. All right, take care.